And a very good evening to you, and welcome to Politics 101. Politics 101 on a Wednesday night. Tonight, we have a special program. It's um, it's Wednesday night, and wherever you're joining us from, I would like to welcome you to the program. And if you're joining us from Guyana, welcome to Politics 101. If you're joining us from outside of Guyana, welcome to Politics 101. Those of you who are joining us from Berbice, welcome to Politics 101. Of course, those of you from down the river, the Kanji Creek, welcome to Politics 101. Big shout out to the people of Baracara. You're perhaps the most famous Guyanese now. Welcome to Politics 101 if you are joining us. All of you from Essequibo, welcome to Politics 101. Those of you joining us from the wider Caribbean, welcome to Politics 101. A special good evening to those of you joining us from Barbados. Welcome. Good evening to you in the United States of America, New York area, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx. Those of you who are a little bit there, up there in Connecticut and Boston. Welcome to Politics 101. I'm not forgetting those of you who are joining us from down south, our very, very, very faithful viewers from Georgia and South Carolina, and I see some of you joining us here from Texas. From Texas, welcome to Politics 101. Those of you joining us from Chicago, good evening to you. Good evening, Louis. Good evening, Patricia. Keith, my brother, good evening, and welcome to Politics 101. Sandra, welcome to Politics 101. Those of you joining us from Jamaica, we got a few emails and texts from Jamaica. We got quite a lot from Grenada and St. Lucia on our programs this week. Of course, we have been featuring the exploits of Shamar Joseph, and it's amazing how cricket still brings us together. Thanks for all the comments, all the messages, and those of you who messaged about last night's program. Dr. Thomas, of course, like so many of us, breaking down in public, and we were chatting backstage. And I was remarking to Dr. Thomas that I had forgotten that he cried on the program, like so many of us, until I woke up this morning and saw the responses to the program. Yes, we are all emotional. It means so much for us. CLR James's dictum, cricket goes beyond the boundary. And, you know, when you saw Shamar Joseph running for the boundary, CLR James came to mind. Good evening to all of you. Good evening to those of you joining from where I am in Arizona. Good afternoon, because it's very much afternoon here. Good afternoon to you and to the loyal viewers, all of you who were joining us from Europe, especially the United Kingdom and France. We are so grateful to you because you all, it's now after 11, going on to 12 o'clock in there, and you all are here every night. I continue to say that when the history of this period is written, all of you who come on to these programs would be in the front seat of that history, because really political communication is being changed, and we hope that we are making our contribution here, as we say over and over and over again. This is not just about party contestation. Certainly for me, it's not. It's about public education and public mobilization of our people at this critical point in our history. What are we going to do about our country? Where in this era of oil and gas, what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with our country? And so for me, that is most important. There are going to be the nights and the times when I do the red meat thing and so on, and you all know that. But for me, the primary objective here is to socialize a new consciousness among our people, both at home and abroad, so that we can determine the way forward. And you all know I've said over and over again on this program that what's happening in Gaza is important for us in Guyana, for us in the Caribbean, because we are post-plantation states. We are small, vulnerable states. And as we see the global order as it is unfolding in Gaza, we have to be concerned. And of course, that little historical note that Israel could have been in our country, Guyana, it's something that we take for granted, but it's an important reminder. I would like to welcome all of you. Good evening, Lynette, my countrywoman, Lynette Zephyr, Lynette Greenwood, all the Lynnettes from Buxton and Annandale, you all are out tonight. And I see the Penitence. The Penitence is in the house. You know, when I was a small boy and you come down to town, you know, to buy runner and blood and so on, and thing to go home for my auntie to make black, because we sell black pudding and so on. You go to Border Market, and then you walk to Big Market to buy the little things there, and then the car park. And then sometimes you would say, go to take a car and go to Penitent Market. The Penitence. The Penitence in the house. Good evening to you. Good night to you, my brother Winston. And Vibert White from Grove. Every time I pass Grove, Vibert, you all is a tongue you all get there, you know. You all like if it's Jack Strong in Grove there. It's so good to have all of you here. And tonight, of course, we are going to be talking about what's happening in Gaza. And the title of our program tonight, it's there. It's there, the title of our program. Genocide in Gaza. You can pose it as a question. You can pose it as a statement. But the important thing there is genocide. And we, as Martin Carter said, who are painters of an ancient skies, discoverers of new planets, sudden stars, we are the world's hope. We are the world's hope. And it's societies like ours that have to raise our voices, as the South Africans have done, in raising their voice and putting their country on the line by going to the ICJ and putting this matter, as they say, within the mainstream. And we in the Caribbean have to do our part. We played an important role in the dismantling of apartheid. Very important role at the level of politics, at the level of sports, at the level of culture, at the level of material assistance. We played an important role in the dismantling of apartheid. Viv Richards could have been the first millionaire cricketer. He turned it down. He got $1 million check to go and play in South Africa. And he said, and I quote, honorary white? Honorary white? How can I be an honorary white? We know that Brian Lara would become the first millionaire cricketer from our region. But Viv Richards gave that up to show solidarity with South Africa. And so when we are talking about what's happening in Gaza, it's very important that we show that solidarity. Welcome to Politics 101. We have a big team tonight. Big cast tonight. My friend Kwesi Ojingo, you know, I tell you all, when Kwesi doing play, you get about 40 people on the stage. He said by me like big cast. But tonight we have a big cast. We have a big cast, and we have Mr. Gerald Pereira, who's the leader of the Organization for the Victory of the People. Those of you who pay attention to the newspapers, he writes there in the newspapers, his letter does belong. So and he's a well-known Pan-Africanist. Um, and we have, let's see here, Professor Thomas is back. Professor Clive Thomas is back. You know that Professor Thomas was on last night. And uh, we have here former President of Guyana, Donald Ramotar, who has been leading the way in the public media in keeping the Gaza issue alive, keeping it on the front burner, on the front burner, on the front burner. Welcome to President Ramotar's first time, and it's the first time for Gerald Pereira too. So they're making their debut on Politics 101. And my co-host for tonight is Rohit Kanhai, who is a political activist, executive member of the WPA, and he's going to help me to navigate the program tonight. Himself, an activist and a keen observer of what's happening on the international scene. So, gentlemen, I would like to welcome all of you to Politics 101 and this discussion tonight.
Thank you.
And those of you, please share the link. Please share the link. I can't do it like Gerald. Share the damn link, man. I can't do it like Gerald, but you all please share the link. Let everybody know it's happening. It's 7 o'clock. And 7 o'clock, it's Politics 101. Politics 101. Good evening, Ras Ricardo. Good evening, Rastaman. It's good to see the Rastafarians coming out in numbers tonight, because you all have helped to shape the world that we live in. In 1930, striking that blow in Jamaica, going up to the pinnacle and setting up that commune and introducing a high level of cultural resistance, And we in the Caribbean cannot be where we are without the input of the Rasta man and Rasta women. Big up to you all, and welcome to Politics 101. Gentlemen, good evening. And let me pose this innocent question, I hope. And that is, why on the last day of January 2024, we should be talking about Gaza? We could be talking about any number of things. It's budget time. We could be continue to talk about Shamar Joseph. There's so many things to talk about in our country and our region, but here we are talking about Gaza. Why? And President Ramotar, I'll call you President Ramotar for the first time. After now it's Donald, because you and me go back a long way. So I think I can call you Donald. But out of respect, President Ramotar, you will take the new ball. Why should we be talking, as we are doing tonight, about Gaza and what's happening there?
Well, I think you hinted to it at the beginning of your introduction that Guyana cannot be seen as an island only with its own problems, that what happens in the rest of the world affects us as well. And what is happening in Gaza now is affecting everyone in the whole world at this point in time. That it is actually testing our humanity. Who would have thought that at this 21st century, after all humankind's advances, that we would have something like this happening in the Gaza, a Holocaust? I don't think there's another word that probably captures what is happening there better than the term Holocaust that was done by Hitler in the 1940s, because that is exactly what is taking place in the Gaza. There's a systematic and there's genocide taking place there. The very fact that hospitals are being targeted, schools are being targeted, children are being targeted, tells me very clearly. And then the continuous bombing, almost 2 million people out of 2.4 million people without homes, living in tents in their own land, um, tells me that it is genocide and it's something that we have to be very concerned about. Because once human rights are degraded in any part of the world, it can happen in other parts of the world as well. And therefore, I think that we have a duty more than just mere solidarity. We think we have a duty to stand up, to call a spade on this issue.
Call a spade on this issue. Former President of Guyana, Donald Ramotar, starting us off tonight. Let me come to you, Gerald. Why should we be talking? You've heard the president. Why should we be talking about what's happening in Gaza?
Okay. Greetings to everyone, and thank you, David, for having this hosting this program this evening. I would also like to give a special salute to former President Ramotar for standing up and taking a very principled position in relation to what is happening in Gaza. What is happening in Gaza is unprecedented. I mean, we had you had before cases of genocide in Kampuchea or Cambodia when the Khmer Rouge carried out the Khmer Rouge policy of driving people from the urban areas into the rural areas, and over almost 1 million people in that Kampuchea were exterminated. And we had the same thing in Rwanda, but this is the first time we've been able to see this thing televised. Genocide, the acts of genocide being televised. We've been able to witness it, and it's something that those of us, if we stand in defense of humanity, we have to call it what it is. It is genocide. The Netanyahu and the Israeli regime is hell-bent on wiping out the Palestinians. I mean, entire bloodlines have been wiped out. This is well documented. More than 10,000 children have been killed. And I think it was yesterday, Israeli special forces disguised themselves as medics and went into hospital and executed what they're called leaders of Hamas. And this has been going on, and nobody, the ICJ ruled, but that's another thing. And no one is able to stop Israel. Netanyahu made it clear. He said neither the so-called Axis nor the ICJ can stop Israel from doing what it's doing. So Israel is above the law, and it's quite clear that Israel, like the United States, are rogue states. We see that the West are active partners in this genocide. They're supporting this genocide.
While I have you here, let me ask you a question, Gerald. You lived in that area for a while?
Yes, I lived in Libya.
You lived in Libya.
I traveled the area, yes.
You traveled the area?
Yes, because former President Ramotar will recall many years ago, Muammar Gaddafi founded what was called the Mataba, right? The word Mataba, which brought together many liberation movements and progressive groups. And you had from Africa, you had many liberation groups there who came to the Mataba, including Nelson Mandela's ANC, the PSC, Steve Biko, Black Consciousness Movement, and the Azapo and Zania People's Organization. So you had all these liberation movements there. And I met the different groups that constituted the PLO, because the PLO is an umbrella organization, but there are different organizations that fall under the PLO. Of course, Fatah, founded and led by Arafat, is the largest of those liberation organizations.
Give our audience a sense, because we've been seeing it on television, we've been reading about it, we've been hearing commentaries about it, the way in which people live there, as we would say, packed like sardines, and we have our own memories, historical memories of the slave ships coming across the Middle Passage and being packed in the holds of those ships. Give us a sense of what it is to live on that Gaza Strip.
I've never been to the Gaza. I've never been there, but I know I've come into contact with representatives of different organizations. Like, and I just want to make this clear here, David, just to put this in. You know, the Western corporate media has framed this thing as Israel versus Hamas. That is absolutely wrong. That's a big lie. Secondly, I heard someone, a very leading political activist and former minister in this country, said that Hamas was part of the PLO. That's not true. That's the other one that's wrong. And Mr. Ramkaran said there's this false narrative that Israel created Hamas. That's a big lie. What happened was this. The PLO in its early days had different organizations. Like you have the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which was founded by Dr. George Habash. Then there was a group that split from that called the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, led by Naif Hawatmeh. Then you have the Palestinian Communist Party. Then there's the Al-Saika Brigade, which was aligned to Syria. And you have, of course, Fatah by Arafat is the largest group. But there are at least, then you had one led by Ahmed Jibril, which is called the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command. So what took place on October the 7th when Hamas broke through the fences? Right? Hamas provided the largest contingent of fighters, but they were fighters from 5 different organizations. There were fighters from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which former President Ramotar is a Marxist-Leninist organization. Then there was another organization, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is also Marxist, right? And then you had the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is a different organization. And then you had the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade. So there were 5 different organizations, and there are 5 different groups along with Hamas that are fighting the Israelis. So to say that it is Israel versus Hamas is a big lie. And there's a reason for them doing that, because they want to picture Hamas. Netanyahu did something which was absolutely ridiculous, trying to compare and saying that Hamas and ISIL or ISIS is the same. No, in ideological orientation, they are different. And a very interesting thing here, gentlemen, is have you noticed that since this conflict started, this battle started, have you heard anything from ISIL? Have you heard anything from ISIL or from Al-Qaeda? No. What ISIL did was bomb. They had a memorial activity for General Qasim Suleiman, who was assassinated in a drone attack in Iraq, right? But when Donald Trump was there, they assassinated him with a leader of a group called Katib Hezbollah, which is another group based, a resistance group in Iraq. And when the people gathered for the memorial, ISIS bombed it. You remember that? That was not too long ago. That is what ISIS is doing. Now, isn't it interesting that since ISIL was created, not only ISIL, but Al-Qaeda, go and check the records. They have never touched an Israeli or Zionist target. When the Syrian regime was fighting ISIS in Iraq and in Syria, the Russians intervened and started bombing to soften ISIS forces in a province called Idlib province. And it is well documented that after the bombing, Assad, the loyalist forces, pursued the ISIL fighters, and the ISIL fighters crossed into the Golan Heights, which belongs to Syria but is occupied by Israel, and they went into Israeli territory. And the Israelis responded not by bombing ISIL fighters, but by bombing Assad's forces. This is well documented. In fact, they call ISIS Israeli Secret Intelligence Services.
Okay.
They are working with the Israelis. It's well documented. And the Americans, and this is important, that the defeat of ISIS in Iraq and Syria was done by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards with the Popular Mobilization Brigades in Iraq. Those were the forces that defeated ISIL. It was not the Western forces. It was not Israel. In fact, Israel is collaborating with them.
Mr. General Pereira here, leader of the Organization for the Victory of the People, and we are talking about what's happening in Gaza, what's happening to the Palestinian people, and we are exploring the question. Why should we as Guyanese and West Indians be discussing this issue tonight? I'll now go to Professor Thomas, who's of course no stranger to this audience. Professor Thomas, why should we be talking about what's happening there in the Palestine and Gaza tonight?
Well, I share the views and the concerns expressed by both of the previous speakers. But I think that from the point of view of Guyana, we should emphasize a couple of things. One is that we owe an obligation because Guyana is a near miss from being Palestine or the Gaza. So we owe an obligation to show solidarity with the peoples of Gaza, and we should act as strongly as we can in the political manner to show our disagreement with what is taking place. And secondly, I believe that we should use whatever space there is to pressure the authorities in our country, where we are citizens, to take actions that support the Gazan people. Guyana is now a member of the Security Council, part and parcel of the transformation that has been made possible or coincident with its growth into being a petro state. And I think some of those responsibilities that it has to execute at the level of the Security Council, we should be very vigilant on and ensure that they do, in fact, not succumb to the artifices of the big imperialist powers, and that they show solidarity with the Gazan people. I think I noticed a letter from Mr. Pereira pointing out that he was quite disappointed that we did not show enough support to the Houthis, who were at least making a gesture as practical as they could and as much as they can afford to prevent the continued genocide in Gaza, and that we were not acting in the best interest of them in the way in which we are operating within the Security Council. And I think that we should use our influence to ensure that it becomes such a part of the national debate that we bring all the authorities, all those responsible for actions, to the full public scrutiny of their actions, because I'm not sure what is happening in the Security Council. I try to check it out from day to day, but there's so many different things happening. And I know in particular what is going to be crucially important is what will happen if the Security Council, as it says it will do, take up the position of the ICJ based on their preliminary rulings on the South African case. We have to ensure that our authorities that represent us in Guyana take the correct progressive position. So that is my specific concern.
Professor Clive Thomas, of course, a long-standing member and one of the founder leaders of the Working People's Alliance, here weighing in along with former President Donald Ramotar and Mr. Gerald Pereira, leader of the Organization for the Victory of the People, Pan-Africanist, and someone, as you heard from his historical information there very, very familiar with the political and social landscape of the Middle East and so on. Welcome to Politics 101. Wherever you're joining us from, please share the link. Let me bring in my co-host, Mr. Rohit Kanhai. And Rohit, you can, before you pose your first question, weigh in on the question that I pose as to why we should be talking about what's happening in Gaza here tonight. Over to you. You are muted. We are not hearing you.
I will concur with Donald that this is a challenge to our humanity. And the statement made by Mr. Pereira, no one can stop this genocide, I would challenge that. I don't think he actually meant that. America has the capacity to stop it. All they have to do is stop the arms, stop the financing, and enforce the United Nations resolutions. So, from my position, the primary agent that can stop this is the United States. Secondly, there's a lot of parallels for Guyana. As Dr. Thomas said, we have a historical link. There was the possibility of Israel having some connection to Guyana, perhaps settling here in Guyana. But the South African connection, you have to have a very profound admiration for the South African in challenging at the International Criminal Court what's going on. It shows that the connection South Africa had as an apartheid state with Palestine that connection came at the moment when the Palestinians truly needed it. Furthermore, this situation has gotten worse since the ICC ruling. On Friday, they're supposed to make a very important announcement. But the Israelis have stepped up in face of what was said by the ICC. They have done everything.
The ICJ, you mean the ICJ?
The ICJ, they have done everything to exacerbate the very conditions that should be stopped. And given the recent claim that there were Hamas members in the October 7th attack, even the 5 countries cutting off aid, this is beyond comprehension. Precisely when that aid is necessary, the survival that is being cut off, there's a degree of madness that befoggles the mind. How is this possible in the world in which we exist?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any questions for the panel, Rohit? Any questions for the panel?
Yes. I think Dr. Thomas, Clive, revealed an amazing level of humanity, which is what the topic we're discussing right now, or humanity, when the oil resources of Guyana last night, and I'm tying this in to Gaza, he said to us that the money we have in Guyana, it's like winning the lottery to a large extent. What do you do with that money? And he said we should humanize Guyanese society by spending that oil money on living, raising the living standards of poor Guyanese immediately. That is the Buxton proposal. what comes into contrast with me is we have resources to raise humanity to a higher level. And instead of that being done, what we're fighting over is what to do with the resources instead of making that our priority. And this is the same situation we face with in Gaza, how to humanize what is going on there. You have resources. What do you do with those resources? And what we're seeing, resources are used to kill people instead of making conditions human for people existence. So there are lots of parallels that I will go into.
Any direct questions for the panel? Questions for the panel?
Not at this stage. I
Not
will
at this
develop
stage.
it later.
Gentlemen, I want to put this question to you because I think it's fundamental to what we're talking about here. It's often said that Israel has a right to defend itself. But Professor Thomas, you have said in the past on this program and other programs that Israel is an occupying state. An occupying state doesn't have the right to self-defense. And I want to throw that question out for discussion here tonight, starting, of course, with you, Donald, then to Gerald, and then we go back to CY.
I would agree with that assessment that Israel is an occupying power. And it is the Palestinian that has not only a right to defend themselves, but a right to fight, to resist the occupation. And that is where I think the media, the international media that Gerald spoke about, needs to be considered, because I think that there's a deliberate attempt to frame Hamas as a terrorist organization. But a lot of what happened in October 7th is now beginning to come out more clearly, that the targets that Hamas had, in fact, Hamas made a statement, I don't know if you saw it, a very interesting statement, but all their targets were military targets. Most of the people who were killed, I'm not saying that none of the persons who died there, innocent persons, were not killed by Hamas or the fighters who were there. But most of the people who were killed on that day, the Israelis who were killed, were done by the Israeli forces. That is why even at the beginning of October 7th, they said that there were 1,500 Israelis who died. Then they reduced it to 1,200, and now they reduced it to 1,100, and it's probably about 1,000, because they found a lot of Hamas fighters among the crowd that were killed in the mass party that they had there, the big fair, which says very clearly that Israel used their gunships to go and slaughter people, and they didn't want Hamas to take any hostages. Actually, they were killing hostages and the fighters who were there at the same time. There was a case where there were two women who died in a house. That house was blasted by an Israeli tank. They burnt together because they thought that Hamas fighters were in that house itself as well. So, and then you remember the hysteria that was raised, that babies were beheaded, women were raped. All of that proved to be not true, because there is a deliberate attempt to demonize the Hamas fighters. Some of it, they're coming into some problem in convincing people, because when you looked at the release, the people who Hamas was releasing, you could see that there seems to have been a pretty cordial relation with those that Hamas had. When they were releasing them in good faith. Even some of them give interviews and said how well they were treated by Hamas, which goes against everything that Israeli said and the way the Israelis treat the Hamas prisoners. So that is I think that the first thing to point out, that Hamas is not a terrorist organization. It is a liberation movement fighting for the freedom of the Palestinian people so that they can have a state of their own. It's the same thing with the Houthis. where the United States used the resolution of the Security Council to attack Yemen. But the Yemeni Houthis were the only persons, apart from the South Africans, who were doing something very tangible to stop the slaughter and the genocide that is taking place within the within Gaza at this point in time. Um, I have called on not only I was calling on the whole of the CARICOM because I think we have to recognize the strength of our geopolitics political situation. But I think that if CARICOM stands together, they will make a bigger impact internationally on everything that is there. And there's one CARICOM country that stands out, that's Belize, that broke diplomatic relations with Israel. But I think that CARICOM countries, based on our own history and our own everything that we have in common, should at least, at the minimum, suspend, if they don't want to break relations, at least suspend relationship with the Israeli forces. I want to go back to this question of Rohit mentioned that the Americans can stop it, and that, to my mind, is in theory. That if you look generally at over the years what has taken place in the American society, um, most of the most of the Congress people and the senators do they owe their position to the support that was given by EPAC, the Israeli lobbyist group in the United States. And also, if you look at the composition of the State Department, beginning from Blinken himself, and many of the leading officials in the State Department, I believe, I don't have any evidence, but I believe that if we know for a fact there's record, there are books written about the influence of the Israeli lobby on elections in the Congress and in the Senate, then I think by extension, we will see that that body will have the same kind of authority in influencing appointments to key areas, particularly in places like in the State Department and other areas of that nature. That is why Netanyahu embarrassed the American government several times when he went and addressed the joint Congress and Senate and so forth, and many of those things. So I think the influence of APAC is very strong. I agree that the Americans can stop doing a lot of the things that they're doing, but how free are they to do that is another matter. It's interesting that I'm speaking about the most powerful country in the world seems to be paralyzed by the influence of APAC at this point in time. The other point I will like to make is that um, the breakdown, what Gaza is showing us now too, is that it's extremely worrying for us and for any country in the world, not only for us but all the countries in the world, the breakdown of international institutions, including the United Nations itself. Um, look, we spoke about them stopping financing the UN body that provides a very essential support to the Palestinian people. Um, to me, that seems to be in response to what is taken, what the court has ruled, and that they are using that as an excuse to try to either force concessions from Hamas or to continue to punish the Palestinian people at a time when the Palestinian people have no kind of services, sanitary services, health services, educational services, even life is so uncertain in Palestine at this point in time. To withdraw that kind of support from them at this type makes them just as guilty. All the countries that are withdrawing this support makes them just as guilty as Israel itself in what is taking place. But the breaking down of international institutions, Israel disregarding the court's ruling, making it worse, as somebody mentioned here just now, tells us that they feel that they can that they are very well protected and they can do as they please. And there's another aspect I believe that we must take into consideration, It's a personal aspect of Netanyahu. Netanyahu will go to jail for corruption if he was not the prime minister of Israel. And he is doing everything to ensure that this war continues so that he will not be arrested and put in prison. So that he has also, apart from the general right wing fascist forces that actually control Israel today, he has also a personal interest in keeping this war going, and that is one of the reasons that I believe that he's appearing to be so stubborn and even refusing to listen to the United States and making them seem for the first time so impotent in doing anything to stop the slaughter that is taking place in the Gaza. That is my initial comments.
Former President of Guyana, Donald Ramotar, here on Politics 101. Only on Politics 101 can we find common ground. I remember, and CY and Donald and Rohit may remember this. I remember in 1983, when the U.S. invaded Grenada, it was quite a thing to see the WPA, the PPP, and the PNC picketing the American embassy together, and those were the war days. Those were the war days, and we all came together in front of the American embassy on the issue of the invasion of Grenada. There are times when our politics, our internal politics, give way to the international situation. Let me bring in Mr. Gerald Pereira again. The same question. The whole issue of Israel being an occupying state and the consequences of that. You're muted, Gerald.
Sorry. I fully endorse the position of Dr. Thomas and Mr. Ramotar. Israel is an occupying power, and the Palestinians have a legitimate right to resist. Having said that, I was not surprised when South Africa brought the case before the ICJ. You have to go back to the link between the liberation movements in South Africa and the Palestinian Liberation Organization. When the ANC in South Africa and the ANC and PAC in South Africa, as well as MPLA in Angola and SWAPO in Namibia, when they were fighting the apartheid regime in South Africa was cooperating with Israel in the transfer of nuclear technology. I had the opportunity of listening to Fidel Castro at the World Conference Against Racism in South Africa, where he spoke at the stadium. And Fidel said that one of the things the Cuban fighters and the liberation forces had to do in the battlefield was to adjust the tactics, because South Africa was prepared to use limited nuclear strikes against the frontline nations with the full knowledge of the United States and the West, and that Israel provided the nuclear know-how to South Africa. So South Africa had this nuclear technology. And one of the conditions for the transfer of power when Mandela came into office was that the nuclear technology will not fall into the hand of the black government. It will be handed over. So it was okay if the white regime had nuclear weapons to nuke black people. But the minute the ANC came into office, they had to hand over that. Fidel Castro said that is well documented. When Mandela came out and he was interviewed, he was at the Ted Koppel show. He said, in our darkest moments, when our backs were to the wall, there were three men who stood with us. He said, Colonel Gaddafi, Fidel Castro, and Yasser Arafat. The PLO, with limited resources, trained African freedom fighters and prepared them for that battle that they had at Quito Carnival that forced South Africa to the negotiation table, because the military option was no longer. They couldn't. So Mandela went and he visited Gaza. There's a big statue of Mandela in Gaza. So this struggle, this solidarity, the African liberation movement have always stood with the Palestinian struggle, and the Palestinian liberation movement have always supported the struggle against apartheid. So you have that concrete solidarity existing. It goes back for years. And what little is known about this, that when the Cubans were fighting at the Battle of Quito Carnival, there were some Palestinians who volunteered to go and fight alongside those liberation forces. I think some of them came from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, because some of those groups had close connection to AZAPO, Tanzanian People's Organization, because you know what, the AZAPO was more Marxist-Leninist. ANC was not a Marxist organization or such. I think all the gentlemen here are aware of that. So I was not surprised when South Africa brought that case, because who felt it, feels it, knows it. So the South Africans know what apartheid is about, right? And they brought that, and the people in Gaza were rejoicing, you know, that this was done. And, you know, you look at it and you see some of the Arab nations, right? And countries that are meant to be Muslim taking positions that are helping the Zionists. And this just shows you that it brings you back to the class analysis too of the Popular Front. Because what distinguishes the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine from Hamas is they brought in a class analysis. They were saying that while we are fighting the Zionists, we have to take the battle to these bourgeois Arab regimes that have facilitated Zionism. And you've seen it, you're seeing it, you're witnessing it. You have the Houthis throwing missiles at Israel and the Israelis, and Jordan is intercepting it. You know, the Saudis actually cooperate with the Zionists. In fact, one of the positions that were taken that came up for a ceasefire that Qatar came up with was prepared by the Zionists. So, you know, this is at the end of the day too, you have all these contradictions.
Right.
But the Arab regimes, right, not one Arab country, right, have been able to say, look, let's put an end to this. And it's only the Houthis. The Iranians provided help to the Houthis and Hezbollah and those groups, but they are not state players. They're not state actors, though they're very powerful. But you know, you have this. This is taking place, and Saudi Arabia and all of them. You know, the Saudis do big business with the United States. They have tremendous investment in the United States, and the US takes all that money and give it to Israel. And Mr. Ramotar pointed out something earlier. AIPAC, AIPAC is a very, very powerful lobby. They can make Congress people and they can break you. Look at what they did to that sister from Harvard University.
Really?
Look at what they did.
Yeah.
You know? And Netanyahu know what he is talking about. He said they cannot stop us. They will not, no one can stop us. And he knows what he's talking about. And I think, he wants to hear it, I think it's absurd to appeal to the devil to stop one of his demons. You know, it just is not going to happen. Farrakhan once said, you cannot appeal to the beast. The beast has no ability to reason.
Yeah. Gerald Pereira here, contributing to our discussion tonight, and we talk about what's happening in Palestine. What's happening in Gaza. Professor Thomas, we were, of course, commenting on your observation about Israel being an occupying state. If there's anything you wish to add to what Donald and Gerald said, you can. But I also want you to tackle the question of the significance of the South African case that went before the ICJ. Over to you.
Okay, I have one brief footnote on what was exchanged before. In point of fact, there were about 12 people who have been challenged as being complicit in the Hamas operation that started the war on October the 7th. That allegation has been made from all places. Guess where? Israel. So the fact that they accepted it as an allegation has forced the United Nations to preempt the results by firing the people immediately. And when it is pointed out to them that this represents less than 0.01% of the people they employ, they are now embarrassed. But they found themselves in a situation now, and the US is trying to appease it by saying they're willing to restart once they clear up the issues satisfactorily. So the extent of the control that Netanyahu has been able to exhibit in the relations with the US is, I think, remarkable. But much of it has to do with the fact that I think Biden is really, the President of the United States, Biden, has really capitulated. He does not want to do anything other than what is being done. I don't know where he sees his logic from. And it has led to a severe disappointment among young radicals in the United States. I don't know anyone that I used to know who support him and who don't even go to vote. So we have to expect tremendous changes coming after the elections this year. I personally do not think that he would get back into power. There has to be a ceasefire and several months of living with a ceasefire for people to ever think of voting up for him again. So much has been a disillusionment. So I think we have to take the fact that the politics going forward is going to be very complicated.
It's going to be
Not
very
just
complicated. Yes.
politics, because I'm as fearful of Trump as I'm disappointed by what has emerged so far, because he is truly a wild card, and I have a foreboding that we might end up in an apocalypse, a deep foreboding, because I can't see how these problems can be resolved otherwise. And the easy linkage between acknowledging and normalizing what Israel is doing, even to the extent of accepting this trivial complaint about 12 Hamas people being involved in the activities of the UN in terms of giving aid and support, humanitarian support to Israel. That's a flimsy excuse for denying people at this point of time where they can see after the case has been brought by South Africa, how much suffocation has been taking place. And I think with all that evidence before us, it's hard to see how humanity can come back on a normal plane. That's just my feeling. I had deep feeling. Probably I should say not so much a feeling as a fear. Literally, I'm fearful that will be the outcome. Because I cannot see how Trump could lose.
Fearful of
Biden has defeated himself.
Yeah, Biden has defeated himself.
Trump has no idea of international politics.
Yeah.
Trump's brain and actions are all dictated by the ATM machine.
Yeah.
If I may add to something that Clive said there, we must not forget that some of the responsibility of what is happening today began with Trump, that he was the one who recognized West Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Yes, and therefore he will not help me. Yeah, he continued that way.
And he has displayed a very, very strong support for Israel. For those who think that he will bring any kind of relief to the situation in Gaza, I think they should think again.
Yeah. Very tough situation there in the United States of America. We are discussing what's happening in the Palestinian and Gaza. Rohit, you want to comment on the issue of Israel being an occupying power and the consequence for that of what's happening there?
Yes, Dr. Normal Finkelstein, he's a scholar on this Israeli-Palestinian situation, and he said, yes, as an occupying power, the Palestinians have the right to resist, to fight back, and they cannot be faulted for anything they do, given the fact that Israel has an air force, it has sophisticated weaponry. The Palestinians started their fight back with stones and whatever they could use against the occupying power. So on the plane of legality and morality, the Palestinians can do nothing wrong in terms of resisting an occupying power. The fact that the court has linked October 7th in their deliberation to the South African case of genocide, really the two things should not be connected. It seems as if the court is somehow appeasing some moral condition in linking what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians with October 7th. The two things, even though it seems to be obvious, has no relationship.
And of course, we are going to talk about the case, the South African case, the case brought by the South Africans, the ruling of the court, and how do we see that going forward. But before we go there, Gerald, you introduced a footnote in history there that has always been and is always on my mind, that when President Mandela came to the United States and he was interviewed by Ted Koppel, he gave a particular response, and as someone who plays around a little bit
right about now, ladies and gentlemen, there's one thing you must do for country when you're going back. The first thing is ask you come up and say yes when you're going back. Yes, right about now, ladies and gentlemen, the next performer on stage, we all know him as the Calypso King of the World. Will you please welcome on stage here at the Paramount, Slinger Francisco, the mighty Sparrow. Who there? Say what? Say what? This is the story about something that is happening right now. A man who is now president of his country in South Africa came to the United States not long ago. He was interviewed on television. And I remember he got inside the bush. I am Nelson Mandela, freedom fighter, liberator of my people in South Africa. Mr. Koppel, should it become necessary that I deal with the devil to ensure my success and liberation of the people, then so be it. Because I owe no apology. In your response to my question, self-explanatory. It says, Interviewing Nelson Mandela on a TV show. Ted Koppel was the interviewer. I want you to know. He wanted Mandela to condemn Muammar Gaddafi, Fidel Castro, Yasser Arafat, right there on TV. Mandela said, these people helped me when apartheid was on the rise. I dealt with them out of necessity, so I do not apologize. You're here. Though it grieves me to see the people suffering, but chains of bondage have been placed on my head to impede my progress. And then the man said, thorns and crystals have been laid on my bed to curtail my rest. I've been tortured and I suffered immensely. They isolate me, incarcerate me. Still in spite of their barbarous cruelty, I will never apologize for my identity. Tell them, you remember that interview? You saw it? Ay, ay, ay. And then he said, no apology for my color. It is part of me. I'm wearing it bravely with honor, pride, and dignity. How can I say sorry for a birthright made proud by my forefathers? A skin that blends with the darkest of night, yet distinguishes me from others. There were times I know because of it, tears of sorrow had filled my eyes. But the Lord made me free in spirit, and I do not apologize. You're here. Though it grieves me to see the people suffering, but chains of bondage have been placed on my head to impede my progress. And then the man said, thorns and crystals have been laid on my neck to curtail my rest. They subject me to gross inhumanity, brutality, hostility. No matter how rough their tactics be, I will never apologize for my identity. That's Marossi. And then he said, I owe no apology. Personally, I have done no wrong. And what I have endured physically have made me more strong. How can I be ashamed of a mind that refuses to be twisted? A heart as warm as the morning sunshine, a character so gifted with these trials and tribulation. I am fulfilling destiny in my quest for emancipation. I owe no apology. Though it grieves me to see the people suffering, but chains of
Yes, the mighty Sparrow, the king himself, the master, capturing that important moment, that interview with Ted Koppel, that Gerald referenced. Sparrow they're capturing, and I remember that interview very well, telling Mr. Koppel I owe no apology. And so that case before the ICJ brought by South Africa, I think it's a tribute to Mandela himself, who refused to condemn Gaddafi and Castro and Arafat right there on TV. Donald, let me start with you. I don't know. We have lost. We seem to have lost Gerald. I hope he comes back. Let me start with you. That case that brought by South Africa, the outcome, and how do you see it going forward?
I think it, as I said, I wrote about it. I said I think I recognize that South Africa saved our humanity, some remnants of it for what is taking place in Gaza, because what is taking place is indescribable, the horrors that is taking place there. So that was very welcome. I mean, South Africa did it when it shows you also that South Africa has a level of independence that a lot of countries in the world don't have, in the sense that look at all the Arab countries, none of them have come forward to make that case. It was left to South Africa to do so. And I think that largely has to do with the influence of the United States and some of the European Union countries. But South Africa was able to resist all of those pressures. I don't have any doubt in my mind that they came under pressure too, but they resisted those pressures and stood on the grounds of principle, something that is so lacking today in our world. Um, on the results of the case, I think it was generally I will go along with the reviews that it has been positive, but I am still disappointed that they didn't come out with a demand for a ceasefire. Looking at what is taking place in the Gaza there, I think they should have called for a ceasefire, and that is my biggest disappointment with it. What is taking place now? I don't. We will know because Israel is supposed to make a report in a month's time, but it's very clear that they are disregarding completely the decision of the court, and it is exposing what I just mentioned, the terrible situation that we face in the world, where international institutions and all this talk about the rule of law that we hear so constantly particularly from forces in the West, seems to be collapsing all around us. And that is, as I mentioned earlier, is extremely dangerous for us, because for small states like us, we depend for our protection a lot on the people to abide by international law and respect decisions of international institutions as the ICJ. So I think it has served to really take the mask off of a lot of people who lecture us about human rights and about the rule of law, when they have it in their power to enforce the decision of one of the highest courts in the world, or if not the highest court in the world, and they're refusing to do so and finding ways and means to try to twist the decisions of the court at this point in time.
CY, the South African case, the
Yeah,
outcome.
I completely share everything that has been said, but my expectations perhaps are a little more optimistic. I think the signs that we're seeing now, the gathering of the security heads in Europe from South Africa, United States, and Israel, they're offering a plan, means that the South Africans are, the Israelis are fearful that the South African case, when reported on within a month, might lead to more urgent action on their part. So they're trying their best to gain an advantage on the battlefield. So I treat this as a normal expectation that you would hold out when you're coming close to an agreement. You scramble for positions. And I think that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to advance as far as possible their position in the negotiations. That's why they made the accusations about the UNRWA agency, the humanitarian agency. That's why they're going to extremes like assassinating people openly and in public, in the sense that journalists are able to capture the assassinations and film them and circulate them, because they're trying to set up the ground rules from which they will want to begin to negotiate the final settlement. So I treat this paradoxically as a sign that a settlement is likely to be on the way. But I agree with the analysis that was given by Gerald.
Rohit, your comments on the South African case? We're trying to get Mr. Pereira back on. Rohit, your comments on the South African case?
Yes, I think the South African case challenges the world order that America has headed since the beginning, the ending of the Second World War. The authority that America was the leader of democracy and human rights. We are witnessing a collapse of the world order. It has already collapsed, led by the liberal democratic forces. And the reason why I said that America has the capacity to stop what's going on and refuses to stop it signals that collapse. America has to be held responsible, whether their internal interests or their external interests goes against them, acting decisively in a way that human rights is respected. I think that there's a crisis in the world order, and we have to have a new world order. So the South African case brings that to the fore. Will they flaunt any decision as they have done? And as Dr. Thomas just referred to, they're trying to subvert any decision from bringing a ceasefire into effect. It's at that stage where the world order has to change.
The world order has to change. Rohit, we've been trying to get Gerald Pereira back on. We seem to have not been successful.
I thought the program had finished.
Yeah, no.
Appeared. You're very lucky to find me. Because I saw my photograph.
Tell you what, gentlemen, we have really touched on quite a few subjects tonight, but there's still a lot to discuss. With your permission, we will resume this conversation next week, Wednesday. If it's a convenient time for everybody, we'll come back next week, Wednesday, and we will continue this discussion because there are a number of other questions I want us to explore. So I want to thank you all for coming through. I know Gerald is somewhere backstage, but I can't seem to get him back on. Sorry, Gerald. And I want to thank all of you for coming on. I want to thank especially Glennis and John, who wrote me. They're big supporters of this program, and they insisted that I do a program on the Palestine and Gaza and what's happening there. And I agreed with that request and ends this program. So with your permission, gentlemen, next week, same time, same place, we'll come back to continue this discussion because there are so many implications. We have not really touched on, Donald did raise the question of CARICOM and what CARICOM could be doing, should be doing. We didn't get into that subject as much as we would want to, but we will start off with that when we come back next week. Thank you all very much for coming through.
Okay, thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
And to you, the audience, thank you very much for staying with us. Thank you very much for coming through. Without you, there is no program. And sometimes we have to pivot from our contentious internal politics and really deal with issues that impact us from the outside. From the outside. Politics are more than just party politics. And I am grateful to you all for staying with us tonight. I'm going to see you all tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, who do I have on? I think I have Eric Phillips and Vincent Alexander on tomorrow night to continue that discussion that they started last week. So I'm going to see you all tomorrow night. Be good, and as usual, love is the watchword here.